A young woman saves a lonely Apache by the river, not knowing what awaited her. The sun had begun its slow descent, bleeding into the hills like a wound stitched across the sky. Dust curled behind Clara Wynn's boots as she walked the river path, the same way she walked it every evening, quietly, without hurry, as though she were chasing ghosts and not daylight. The hush of the trees leaned in close, and the river, thinned from summer's long thirst, whispered beside her like an old friend remembering a story it didn't quite know how to end. Clara carried a satchel over one shoulder, worn soft from years of use. Inside, tucked between muslin wraps and willow bark, were the remnants of her mother's life. The herb journal, its ink smudged from tears and rain, and a little cloth pouch of dried lavender, which had long since lost its scent. She kept it anyway, the way some folks keep broken things they're too tired to let go of. The cabin was an hour's walk back, wood lean and crooked at the joints, much like Clara herself. She had fixed the roof with her own hands after the winter storms clawed it open, patched the window with glass from the general store, learned to boil poultices, splint fingers, and coax fevers into breaking. She was 23, and already the kind of woman people didn't quite look in the eye. Something in her gaze made them uncomfortable, like she knew what their silences were hiding. Her mother had been called a healer once, then a witch, then nothing at all once the fever took her. Clara had not cried when they buried her in soil that refused to hold a cross. She knelt now beside the river's edge, reaching for a tuft of goldenrod bending in the wind. Her fingers were sure practiced. She didn't notice the red until she saw it bloom across the stones, thin smears trailing from the shallows to the brush. She rose, scanning the banks. Her pulse thumped, not loud, but steady. Then she saw him, half in the water, half out, a body slumped like a broken branch beneath the willows. At first, she thought him dead, the way his limbs lay, still and loose, like something no longer attached to will or breath. She stepped closer. He wasn't wearing any uniform, no blue coat or silver badge. His shirt was torn, dark with blood near the ribs. A crude arrow jutted from his side, feathers ragged. His skin was copper dark, hair falling in tangled braids against his shoulders. A thin necklace of beads hung around his throat, and one hand was clenched tight around something she couldn't see. A breath hitched in his chest. He was alive. Clara hesitated. She had been warned about men like this. Apache, they whispered, like it was a curse. Stories told in port shadows and over whiskey mugs. Savage, wild, dangerous. But this didn't look like danger. This looked like dying. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing two fingers gently to his neck. The pulse was there, faint but steady. His lips were cracked. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, pupils blown wide, unfocused. His gaze passed through her like smoke. "I can't carry you," she whispered, mostly to herself. The river answered in ripples. She slid her arms under his shoulders, teeth gritted. He was heavier than he looked, muscle and earth and blood-soaked bone. Her knees sank into the mud. Her back screamed in protest. Still she pulled, dragged him through the brush, up toward the trail. Her breath came in harsh gasps. The arrow shifted with each jolt, and he groaned once, low and hoarse. Clara didn't speak. She didn't ask him who he was, or how he'd come to bleed beside her river. That could come later, if later existed. The trail felt longer on the way back, every step dragging like sorrow. The sky burned down to embers behind her. Bats skimmed the horizon. The river whispered goodbye. By the time she pushed open her cabin door, her arms trembled with the weight of him. She laid him on the cot, her cot, the only one, and knelt beside him. The arrow would have to come out. She boiled water, crushed yarrow and goldenrod, mixed it with beeswax and pine resin. Her hands moved with the memory of her mother's voice, murmuring steps not written in any book. She sterilized her blade in flame. Then she knelt again, eyes steady, and whispered something. Not a prayer, exactly, but close enough. He stirred, groaned. His hand gripped her wrist. "I'm not going to kill you," she said, voice barely more than wind. His eyes opened again, focused this time, dark as the river in moonlight. Then she cut. It was quick, sharp. The arrow slid free with a wet sound, and he cried out, more breath than voice. Blood followed, thick and slow. She packed a wound, bound it, worked until the shaking in her fingers stilled. Night settled like a blanket of ash. The fire hissed in the hearth. Outside, crickets sang like something mourning. Clara sat back, wiping her brow. The man had passed out again, his chest rising shallowly. His face, though pale from blood loss, had the shape of someone carved by wind and time. He didn't belong to the world she knew. And yet, here he was, breathing in her home. She thought of Eli from town, who had once said she'd be safer with a man around. Then he'd asked to kiss her behind the mercantile. When she'd said no, he'd called her cold. She'd felt many things since then, lonely, bitter, tired, but never cold. And now she had brought a stranger into her home. A man with blood on his hands and no name on his lips. Because her mother had once said, "You don't turn your back on the wounded." Clara stood and touched the carved beam above her fireplace, where she'd scratched a simple mark the day her mother died. It was a crooked little sun, etched with a nail. She whispered to it now. Just once. Then she sat on the floor beside the fire, knees drawn to her chest, eyes never leaving the man in her bed. Outside, the wind shifted. The river kept on whispering. Smoke coiled upward from the hearth, thin and blue, like a spirit stretching toward the rafters. Morning slid in through the cabin's single window, dappled and soft, catching on motes of ash and dust suspended in the hush. Clara stirred the stew, hand slow around the spoon, eyes flicking now and then to the cot where the man lay half wrapped in wool and shadow. 3 days had passed. He hadn't spoken. She changed his bandage each morning, careful not to disturb the raw edges of healing. The wound festered briefly, then calmed beneath her mother's poultice. Fever had come and gone like a storm passing overhead, loud, frightening, but leaving things more or less intact. He drank water when she coaxed it to his lips, ate in silence, slept like someone who didn't expect to wake. She waited for words, but none came, only eyes that followed her, careful and unreadable. The world outside carried on with its steady indifference. Wind moved through the trees, like breath through lungs. The river rose a little with late summer rains. Her neighbors, scattered thin across the prairie, didn't visit much. Those who dared had made their opinions known. "Keep your door locked, Clara," old Mrs. Hobb had said just yesterday, her voice creaky as a barn hinge. "An Indian'll slit your throat soon as look at you, even if he seems quiet, especially then." Clara hadn't replied, just smiled the kind of smile that ends conversations. Now, as she stirred the pot, the man made a sound, not a word, but a low hum, barely audible. She turned. His eyes were open, watching her. "You're awake," she said, more to confirm it than to greet. He didn't nod, didn't move, but his gaze didn't wander. She set the spoon aside and walked over, sitting on the edge of a stool by his bed. "You have a name?" There was a pause so long she thought he might close his eyes again and drift off. Then, at last, came a reply, his voice coarse and low, like it had to climb up from somewhere buried. "Taza." She repeated it aloud, tasting it. "Taza." Then softer, like a thread tying them together. His lips moved again. "Means dawn." "Fitting," she said. "You woke up with the light." He watched her, still silent. Then his gaze moved slowly around the room. Her herbs hung in bunches from the beams, lavender, yarrow, boneset, sage. A shelf with chip jars. A small fiddle resting against the wall. "You're not afraid," he said finally. "I was," she replied, "when I found you, but it didn't last." "Why not?" She reached for the canteen and poured water into a cup, handed it to him, fingers brushing briefly. "Because fear doesn't heal anything." He drank, slow and deliberate, as if each sip required decision. Then he leaned back, a hint of weariness etched deep in his bones. She waited, let the quiet settle like dust. He spoke again. "You live alone, since my mother died." She hesitated, then added, "People don't come around much. Say I talk to plants and chase ghosts." "Do you?" "I talk to whatever listens." That earned the faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something nearby. His gaze lingered on the herbs. "My mother burned cedar when we were sick, said the smoke carried prayers." Clara nodded. Mine burned Mullen. Said it sang to the lungs. A silence passed that didn't feel empty. Just waiting. Like breath before a word. She brought him stew in a wooden bowl. Sat near as he ate. Slow but steady. His hand still shaking a little. Why were you near the river? She asked, not pushing, just placing the question gently between them. Taza's eyes dimmed a shade. He didn't answer right away. Then, was tracking someone. A group. Raiders. White men, mostly. Dressed as soldiers. Took our horses. Burned a camp 2 valleys east. My brother was there. Clara looked down at her hands. She already knew the next part. She'd seen it in the hollows under his eyes. The way his voice dulled when he said was, "They left me with nothing," he said, quieter now. But I followed. Too long. Too far. Didn't see the ambush. She didn't touch him. Didn't say she was sorry. Just let the weight of it settle, and sat with it. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slow and rhythmical. It pattered against the window, filled the spaces where words didn't need to be. That night, she played the fiddle. Not for him, not exactly. She always played in the evenings, one song, never loud. Her mother's tune. A soft, winding melody that felt like memory and warmth wrapped around an ache. But she saw the way his head turned slightly, the way his eyes stayed open. The next morning, a small object lay on the table beside her stool. A bird, carved from driftwood, smoothed and shaped with patient hands. Simple. Beautiful. She didn't ask when he'd done it. She just picked it up, held it for a while, then placed it on the windowsill, where the morning light caught its wings. The days passed quiet but full. He regained strength, began helping where he could, splitting kindling, mending the sag in the porch. He moved without noise, like part of the wind. Never asked for anything. Always left more than he took. Once, Clara caught him watching her as she pounded sassafras root. He didn't look away when she met his eyes. "You still plan to leave?" she asked, not softly but not accusing. "I should," he said. "Your people won't like me here." "They don't like me here either," she replied, and turned back to her mortar. One afternoon, she rode into town to trade for salt. Eli Trask stood by the mercantile, leaning against the post with a grin too easy, for its own good. "You've been keeping strange company, Clara," he said as she passed. She didn't stop. "They say he's one of the ones who attacked the mine caravans last spring," he added, loud enough for folks to hear. Clara turned slow. Her eyes met his. "You say a lot of things, Eli." He laughed, but it didn't stick. Something about the way she looked at him, calm, cold, certain, left his smirk unfinished. Back at the cabin, she found Taza by the river, crouched and still, watching the current as if it might give him a message. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him. Their reflections drifted in the water, side by side but untouching. "Smoke carries names," he said quietly. "When we light fires, we speak to the ones before us." Clara breathed in the scent of cedar rising from the embers behind her. The day felt heavy with things unsaid. "If you speak to them," she asked, "what do you say?" Taza looked at her then. Really looked. "I say I'm still here." The wind shifted, and the smoke followed. She nodded, understanding more than she could say. The fire crackled behind them, whispering names neither of them spoke aloud. And still, the river ran on. A pale deer stood at the river's edge, neck bowed, legs delicate as reeds. Clara watched from beneath a sycamore, her fingers damp with the cold dew of early morning. The deer moved without fear, as if the woods had chosen her as kin, as if the world still remembered how to be gentle. Taza stood nearby, crouched in the shallows with water running over his hands, silent in that way he always was, rooted, listening, more spirit than man. They had fallen into rhythm, not spoken of it, not declared anything. But the days passed with his shadow, falling beside hers. The woods grew familiar with the weight of two bodies instead of one. Sometimes he would disappear for an hour or two, slipping between the trees, without warning. She didn't ask where he went, and when he returned, she simply nodded and handed him a cup of tea or the blade for whittling, as if he'd never been gone. He told her stories in pieces, not all at once. about the Mescalero camp he once called home, nestled in the hills of Arizona, the sound of drums echoing against red stone, about his brother Kai, who had a laugh too large for his chest and a wildness the world couldn't tame. Kai had died a year ago, ambushed by raiders dressed like soldiers, mercenaries who played both sides, always with blood on their hands. Taza had hunted them ever since. He never said it was for revenge, but the way he spoke of Kai, the pauses in his voice, the tightening of his jaw when describing their faces, it was clear something inside him had been lost that would not be found again. One evening, Clara showed him the locket her mother had worn, now rusted at the clasp. Inside was a faded sketch of a younger woman, cheekbones sharp like Clara's, eyes that stared out with quiet defiance. They said she was wicked, Clara said. She made teas for sick children and poultices for broken bones. But when the Reverend's wife died of fever, they turned on her like wolves. She healed people, Taza said. They hated her for knowing what they didn't. His eyes didn't leave her face. And you carry that knowing now. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The quiet between them deepened, not hollow but full. Then came the noise. It started one afternoon, the dull crunch of hooves on dry earth, the uneven rhythm of 3 horses. Clara stepped out of the cabin as dust rose on the trail and saw them coming. Eli Trask in the lead, 2 men behind him, rifles slung lazy over their shoulders, but not casual, not safe. She stayed where she was, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe. "Clara," Eli called. "I think we need to talk." The man to his right, heavy-set with a scruffy beard, spat into the grass. "What's this about?" Clara asked, voice level. "You know damn well," Eli said, dismounting with a grunt. "Folks say there's an Apache squatting on your land. Say you've been feeding him, housing him. What folks say doesn't make it true." Eli tilted his head. "So you're saying there's no savage in there right now? Not healing up from whatever he did to the Dunlap homestead last month?" She felt a burn rise in her throat, but she didn't let it show. "He hasn't hurt anyone." "Not yet," Eli said. "But he will. It's in their blood." One of the other men stepped forward. "We could just drag him out, save everyone the trouble." Clara stepped off the porch. "You'll do no such thing." Eli narrowed his eyes. "You'd really stand between us and a killer?" "I'd stand between you and a lie." The tension stretched so tight it nearly split the air. Then a voice came from behind her, quiet but firm. "She speaks true." Taza stepped into the doorway, shirt half-buttoned, hands empty. His gaze did not waver. For a moment, the world stilled. The horses stamped nervously. The man with the beard reached for his rifle, but froze when Taza didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there like something carved from old earth. "Go," Clara said. "You've said your piece." Eli hesitated, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "This ain't over." "I know," Clara said. They left, but their dust lingered long after the sound of hooves vanished. That night, Taza sat by the fire, sharpening his blade with slow, even strokes. "They'll come again," he said. "Yes, I should go." Clara stirred the coals, watching the sparks drift up. "Where?" He didn't answer. "You think leaving will keep me safe?" "No," he said, "but it might keep you from having to bury someone." She turned then, looked at him full. "I already buried the one person I loved most. I'll not lose another without a fight." Taza's jaw clenched, but his eyes softened. "You don't even know me. I know you've never lied to me. I know you listen when others don't. I know the way you look at the river." He held her gaze, the knife stilled in his hand. "I left the war behind once," he said, "but it follows." "You saved yourself," she said. "That's not war. That's survival." He didn't speak again that night, but the next morning he was gone. The bed was neatly made, the fire laid ready in the hearth, and on the windowsill, beside the driftwood bird, he'd left one of his bracelets, woven of black horsehair and 3 turquoise stones. Her name, though never spoken, hummed in the silence he left behind. The days after were quiet in the worst way. She went about her work, boiling water, tending plants, patching her roof where the storm had clawed it loose. But her eyes were always on the woods. her ears always listening for the sound of returning footsteps that never came. One morning, she woke before the sun and took the bracelet in hand, tucked it in her pocket, saddled her mule, and left. No note, no map, just instinct and a heart that knew what it didn't yet understand. The trail ran north at first, then bent west toward the canyon lands. She asked questions when she reached the outskirts of the next settlement, low, careful questions. An older woman sweeping her porch said she'd seen a man matching his description 2 nights ago, heading toward the old hunting valley. Said he looked like he carried ghosts in his pack. Clara thanked her and rode on. By dusk, the sky turned violet and bruised, and smoke curled up in the distance, thin, unnatural. Not campfire, not cooking. She followed. At the edge of a shallow ridge, she saw them, 5 men, their coats mismatched, their boots worn hard, but their rifles polished and ready. One of them had Taza by the arms, holding him still. Blood streaked down his face. Another man shouted, laughing between his teeth. Raiders, the ones he had hunted, or their kin. And now they had him, weak and outnumbered. Clara's heart thudded once, then dropped into calm. She slipped down the ridge, pulled free the pouch from her saddlebag, the one she'd packed with dried nightshade, valerian root, and thorn apple. A sleeping draught, bitter as bile. She found their water skins, while they argued over what to do with him. Quiet as mist, poured the powder into the mouths of each flask. Then she crept back into the brush and waited. Night came, and with it, confusion. They drank, and one by one, the raiders dropped like marionettes whose strings had snapped. Taza watched, stunned, as Clara emerged from the trees, face lit by moonlight. "You followed me," he said. She crouched beside him, cutting the rope around his wrists. "No," she whispered. "I came to bring you home." His eyes met hers. There was blood in his mouth, but when he smiled, it reached all the way to the bone. They didn't speak much on the ride back. The stars did enough for both of them. Morning cracked across the canyon like a slow, golden yawn. The land had a hush to it, as if the earth itself held its breath. Shadows retreated from the cliffs, curling back into stone. Clara sat by the fire she'd built hours before dawn, legs folded beneath her, the last of the kindling sputtering at her feet. Taza slept nearby, wrapped in a blanket she'd carried from the cabin, one she'd once woven with her mother, back when winters felt longer and she still believed in safety as something you could keep. He hadn't spoken much since the escape. His body bore the bruises of men who fought without honor, but it was his silence she watched most closely. Not avoidance, not distance, something deeper, like his soul had wandered too far and was still making its way back to him. When he woke, it was slow and wordless. He sat up, bones groaning, and drank from the tin cup she passed him. His eyes drifted to the ridge behind him, then to her. The world between them felt fragile, woven from threads neither of them had names for. "You saved me," he said, not with gratitude but with quiet recognition. Clara shrugged gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not the only one who can track shadows." They broke camp without hurry. The mule carried their bags, and they walked side by side for most of the day, the trail winding through scorched brush and outcroppings of bone-white rock. At one point, Clara reached for his arm when he stumbled. He didn't flinch. He just stood there for a moment, eyes closed, like he was relearning the weight of kindness. When the sun began to tilt, they reached the river again, not the stretch near her cabin, but farther up, where the banks grew wilder, untouched. Trees leaned low over the water, branches trailing like fingertips. The current here moved slower, more thoughtful, as if it, too, remembered how to wait. Taza knelt at the edge, cupped water in his palms, let it slip through his fingers. "This is where I stop," he said. Clara stood behind him, arms folded loosely. "You mean to keep walking?" "I mean to stay," he replied, glancing over his shoulder. "But not in that house. Not where they came. Not where blood was nearly spilled." She looked around. The place was empty, quiet, but something in it called to her. A place untouched by cruelty. The promise of beginning again. "I don't need the house," she said. "Just the river. Just you." For the first time, his expression cracked. Not in pain or guardedness, but something gentler. Surprise, maybe. Or relief. They built slowly. Days passed like seeds in wind. Scatter, settle, grow. They gathered fallen limbs, cut saplings with care, stripped bark. She showed him how to mix clay with ash to seal the walls. He taught her how to stretch hide for weatherproofing. Their hands were blistered, their backs ached, but the ache was honest, earned. There were no blueprints, only instinct. But the shelter rose anyway, walls of earth and wood, roof thatched with pine boughs, a door that creaked, a fire that held steady through the night. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Evenings felt like sighs. Clara played her fiddle sometimes, though never the same song twice. Taza carved things, a bird, a fox, a tiny wolf with eyes of stone. They hung them on beams, tokens of days past. The river was their music, the trees their company. He spoke more now. Not stories, but thoughts. Things he never shared before. I used to believe that if I kept moving, the pain wouldn't find me. And now I know pain waits, just like the river. She nodded. But so does healing. He turned that over in his mind, like a stone in his palm. One afternoon, she asked him what scared him most. Being forgotten, he said. I won't forget you, she answered. He touched her hand then. Not with hunger, not with desperation, just a steady, reverent brush of fingers. Like he was asking permission. Like he understood that love was not taken, but offered. In time, she leaned into him. A little at first. Then more. Not all wounds bleed. Some just ache quietly beneath the skin. But together, their silences made something softer than sorrow. Something almost like peace. One day, a small group of riders passed by the ridge above them. Didn't come down. Didn't ask questions. Just looked once, then rode on. Clara watched until they disappeared into the trees. We'll never be completely safe, she said. No, Taza replied. But we're not alone. That night, the stars shimmered like silver seeds sown across black soil. Clara lay beside him beneath the lean-to, breath slow and full. His arm was around her, heartbeat steady against her back. She closed her eyes. The river kept whispering. Seasons shifted, almost imperceptibly. Spring came, and with it green shoots that coiled up through the loam. Clara planted things, lavender, mint, goldenrod, while Taza fished from the shallows and shaped a canoe from a fallen tree. Their life became not a story, but a rhythm. Not a rescue, but a choice. In late summer, she found herself standing at the bank, hand resting on the slight curve of her belly. She hadn't told him yet. Not because of fear, but because some truths deserved quiet, deserved to bloom like wildflowers, untamed, undeniable. He came up behind her, and though she hadn't spoken, his hand slid to hers. They stood that way for a long time. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The river carried the rest. Smoke curled from their chimney now, most evenings, gentle and blue, a mark against the dusk that said someone lives here. The carved bird still hung on the window beam, its wings tilted into light, and from time to time, Clara would speak aloud, not to anyone in particular, not always to Taza, but to the ones who'd gone, to her mother, to Kai, to the boy she'd once been promised to, who hadn't loved her past her strangeness, to the parts of herself that once believed she was too much or too little to be chosen. And the wind carried her words. The river listened. Sometimes love doesn't arrive as thunder or heat or flame. Sometimes it walks out of the trees, broken and bleeding, and lays itself beside your fire. Sometimes it never asks to stay, only waits until you ask it not to leave. Even the river waits. And for the ones who choose each other gently, patiently, truly, that is enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another Wild West tale whispered by firelight.